Welcome to another edition of How to Yard. So today we're working on a 97 to 01 Honda CR-V. This is probably one that I've wanted to record several dozen times. It just seems that every time I come across a B Series, it's always something where I can't record. And this is going to be a how-to get the transmission out and the things you need for your all-wheel drive B Series conversion. Okay, so I think the first thing they're going to be worried about and concerned with is that it is manual. And this one is. It is also all-wheel drive. We're going to be taking things like the transmission, the starter, the shifter itself. So we'll go with how to remove the shift boot from the vehicle. On this one, we're also going to take the gauge cluster as well. The manual CR-Vs all come with the tachometer, but we're going to use this for a CRX and Civic and EF build that we're working on. One of the number one questions I get asked about all-wheel drive is what all do we need? Well, there's not a whole lot we're going to be using off of the CR-V other than the transmission, and there's specific components that we need from the CR-V to make that transmission work in our conversion car. Things like the driveline and differential. Right now, people aren't using the CR-V stuff, so we're going to leave this behind. There's not a huge demand for it right now in the market, because as of right now, people that are doing all-wheel drive swaps want the 88 to 91 all-wheel drive wagon manual. We're going to start this removal by removing the wheels, and then we're going to work on everything underneath. And as you can see, I already got this set up. These are the carpets that you take out of the trunk area. I always like to use those so I'm not laying in the dirt. The suspension comes apart just like any other regular Civic. The only difference is that this axle nut is 36 millimeters, and we're going to use our trusty Milwaukee 18-bolt impact to remove that. We're going to take off the shift fork here, and then the lower ball joint, and then we're going to remove this axle out. We're not going to be reusing this axle. The 14 that holds the upper shock fork to the shock is kind of hard to get to with the half-inch gun here, and it kind of bangs up against the wheel well. So what I end up doing is I'll break it loose with a 14 millimeter ratchet first, and then I'll come in here with my Milwaukee impact ratchet. But before we get to this axle, I'm going to remove this exhaust because it's going to be in the way of all the other stuff that we need to get to up in there, like the T-bracket bolts and a transmission bolt. So to get this off, we have two 12s here, and then a lot of times what ends up happening is the 14s that are up in there are stripped, and we're going to hope for the best. Alright, I'm getting ready to remove the intermediate shaft, and I wanted to point out this ratchet that I'm using. I almost never use a fixed head ratchet because there's hardly a scenario where the ratchet ever needs to be in a fixed position. A lot of times when I come up across these all-wheel drive B Series, I'll see that they leave the axles and the intermediate shaft in when they take the transmission. Well, let's say if this is your very first B Series swap and you're going all-wheel drive, you want to make sure that you grab the intermediate shaft because that's something you're going to need. So in this case, I'm going to take that, but I'm not going to take the axle. I'm going to remove this. If I had 36 millimeter hubs, maybe I would keep the axles because they should work with our B Series transplant. But in this case, since we don't have 36 millimeters, I'm not going to worry about it because we could use our standard B Series sized axles. Unless you're trying to apply some serious torque to remove or tighten something. And in my opinion, if you need something that long with that much leverage, I believe that you're using the wrong tool. I'm able to get in here pretty easily with the flex head ratchet, and then I'm going to come in here and finish the job off with my battery ratchet. The same, in my opinion, applies to extension as well. Again, rarely an opportunity where I need one that is in a fixed position. All of my extensions will all be the wobble head. The intermediate shaft is now out. Make sure you grab the special shoulder bolts. There's bolts specific to this intermediate shaft. You can see it here. So the driveline is still connected. We're not going to remove it because again, there's not any demand for these just yet. And usually from the forklift, they get damaged anyways. So there's the 10 millimeter hex nuts. These are the 12 points. I'm going to remove these from there while the engine's still attached. Then we're going to move over here to this bracket. I'm going to take this off, then our heat shield, then our 19's up there. We are going to keep the driveline bolts. Those are pretty special, and there's 4 of them. So what we're gonna do is once we remove every one, and we take the driveline down, because really once these are unbolted, this thing will swing right down. We'll screw the bolts right back in. All right, it's off. Just like that. Just like that, and it's disconnected. Alright, so now I'm going to crack loose the T-bracket bolts. Those are 19 millimeters. I'm going to use this 1/2 inch ratchet here first to break it loose, and then I'm going to go in there with my battery ratchet. And I won't use the big 1/2 inch ratchet because you'll get jammed up in there once you start trying to back that bolt out, and I'll show you how that happens. See, right here you can kind of see how it's jamming up there, and I understand that this extension's a little long, but if it was shorter, then it might not clear the differential as you're trying to get in here to loosen it. Alright, the T-bracket bolts are out, and we're not going to be using this at all. Most of the swap kits out there for EG, EK, and DC, there you have their own replacement mount bracket. We do have to take the 17 millimeter off here. Then there's going to be one hidden over here along with this inspection plate, just like the standard B series. We're all finished underneath. We're going to work our way up top. I took off the heat shields and some of the brackets. This bracket right here bolts to the engine and the transfer case. All the other hardware that comes off the bell housing might be a good idea to keep if this is going to be your first B series transplant. Alright, with the airbox removed, it exposes all the transmission and all the goodies we need to get to. The starter on the B series all-wheel drive is specific. You cannot use a standard hydraulic B series starter with this, so you make sure you got to grab that. Secondly, it also has shift cables, not shift linkage like other B series hydraulic transmissions. And it's really hard to get to, so I'm going to take off this tube here and a lot of these hoses so that you can see what we're working with. Do not damage those. You will need this for your conversion. And now we can see what we're up against. Alright, so here's the shift cables that come from underneath the car. We'll put those aside. And then these are some clips that hold the cables to the transmission. Well, I find that it's pretty difficult to get these off with the transmission in place. So what we're going to do is unbolt the cable stay from the transmission. There's a bolt here, here, and then one back there. Alright, so we're going to use a long extension for that, but we don't forget the bolts from these because we're going to need those, and we're going to need the cable stay. Don't leave that behind. We need to put it back on the transmission. Alright, you got some light brought in here by the Milwaukee 18 volt power lamp. Oh, God, I love their tools. But I brought this in here so we can expose this bolt down there that it's really hard to see, and this is not standard to normal Honda B series. So you'll see a little 14 millimeter that I'm pointing out right there, right above the speed sensor, and that 17 right above it. So those two, this 17's got to come out, and then that 14's got to come out. This 17 that I've got my ratchet on right now holds the T-bracket to the rear engine, and it's not attached to the transmission at all. In other vehicles, we would just leave that one on to kind of keep the engine up. But what happens on the CR-V, when you leave that in there, it cocks the engine back and away, and the transmission gets caught up on the lower subframe. And you have like one heck of a time trying to get the transmission out, undo that rear bracket completely. We only have a couple of more things left to do, and that's the hydraulic line that goes down to the slave cylinder, and then the starter, and then the front torque mount. The starter has two 14 millimeter bolts on it. The slave cylinder, again, if this is your first B series transplant and you're putting it in a hydraulic system, you might want to keep it. there's just 3 more 17s that we have left to pull off. I already loosened them with my 1/2-inch ratchet, and I'm going to finish it off with good old faithful. This next part may seem a little violent, but it's a necessary evil. Dropping the transmission, in this case, literally means dropping the transmission. What I found that works best, that there's 3 17s right here that we got to work with. We're going to use a 17mm deep socket on either one. This back one back there, and then these 2 up front. We're going to loosen the 2 studs first, take the nuts completely off, and then the last one's going to be a bolt. It's going to be short. We're going to take the impact gun, loosen it until the transmission falls. Literally. It's going to be pretty violent. Now that the rear T-bracket is removed, the only thing that holding the engine in place is one mount up on the driver's side. As a contingency, I set up this tire here to catch the transmission as it falls. It won't fall completely off the engine. It will kind of hang out there, but just in case it does, I have this set up. Now, once the transmission and engine drops, make sure that you're completely out of the way when it does that, and no one's over there on the driver's side. Then we'll be able to take a pry bar and loosen it off. It will fall, but we're going to stay out of the way of the fall, and the tire is going to catch most of the action. The transmission is hanging off the engine, just like I said, and you saw that it looked pretty violent there. The engine came down just a little bit, and if the T-bracket was still on, the bell housing would be completely caught up against the rear subframe, and it would make it so difficult to get this transmission out. But now we're going to take a pry bar and separate the transmission from the block, and it will fall down here on this tire. Remember that part about not laying in coolant? Well, I got ahead of myself and now I'm going to have to do it. Something that I got carried away with the removal here, and I forgot that I needed to unbolt the shift cables from the chassis. The shift cables come from underneath the chassis right above the exhaust and the drive line. There's a 10mm nut that holds it on here, and that's all that holds it to the body. But to make it easier to pull the cables out of the chassis, I'm going to unbolt the bracket completely with this 10mm nut right here. The cables, from experience, I found out that bringing the cables out from inside the car is much easier. We got to go inside after we unbolt this and undo the shift cables from the car. There was an episode that I tried to edit, but I lost a lot of footage, and that was of my wife removing the stuff. Matter of fact, in that episode, she's inside removing the shifter off another CRV that we pulled a transmission out of. There she found the card to the minister that ended up marrying us shortly after.
Just FYI, I can do wedding and funeral services if you or a friend is looking for an officiant. Good to know, Shelly.
We're inside now, and I'm going to show you how to remove the shift knob and the shift boot, and then we're going to cut to my wife's part of the job. Here's the shifter. We just pull down on the shift boot and spin the knob off. Once the knob's off, then we can take off the center console. There's going to be a screw here and then a clip back there on both sides that need to be removed. There's going to be 2 screws underneath here that got to be removed, and then this whole boot comes off. The shifter is also very important to the swap. You have to have the shifter and the cables in order for this transmission to work.
Hey, you got it out. How many, so what did it take to get that off?
2 screws here, 2 screws here, and 2 screws here.
So 6 screws?
Yes.
Pretty easy? Mm-hmm. Very good. Okay, so let's see what we got to do now. Again, this shifter is specific to the transmission, and I found out that it's much easier to remove the cables from the shift box than try to take it all out in one spot. And it's much easier to get to these clips here too. Like we had a hard time with that on the other vehicle, right? Mm-hmm. But you're going to find out using that same method, using the hook tool, to get those clips out is much easier than it was on that other car. Mm-hmm. So what we're going to do is there's 4 bolts that hold it on. Boom, boom, boom. We're going to take those clips out of there of the shift cables. There we go. And then there's a little clip right there Once this comes out, we'll be able to flip it upside down. We'll be able to take this rod off of the bottom. All right, so since you've never done this, I'll just let you kind of try to figure it out, but I'll tell you, you need to grab the hook tool. We'll start with a 3/8 ratchet with a 6" 3/8 extension, 12 millimeter deep socket.
Got it.
For a 3/8 also.
Okay.
Okay, so since the shifter is stable, we're gonna use the hook tool first.
Oh, okay.
All right, and we're gonna kind of dig in those clips like we did on that transmission. Oh. Much easier, right?
Yeah.
Now we need to keep those, so remember where they go, because we need them. We don't want to lose them. Grab your 12. Yep, and let's unbolt it. Now that that cable is off. All right, now go ahead and flip that thing around. Okay, look, that's how the ball joint's attached. All right, there's another set of clips here.
With the 2 nuts removed, we could pull down on the cables and turn the bracket around to expose that bolt. With the bolt removed, we can now separate the bracket from the cables, and that's going to make it much easier to take the cables out of the engine bay. All right, grab the boot, and now the cables can slide out. All right, so they're going to want to bind on their way out because there's a pretty straight and hard shank that's on them. So you gotta kind of have to fold them down a bit to be able to pull them out. They might also get hung up, and the cables might be pulling out from inside the cable. There's one, and there's 2. Now we can just simply work them out right here. Let's see. Oh, there they are. Completely out. The cables are out, now we're going to prep it. We're going to take the cables off of the cable stay and bolt it back down to the transmission. I get a lot of calls for this part. It is part of the transmission. No, I will not sell just that piece. The transmission and the cables are useless without it. So of course the cables have the same kind of brackets that we have on from the inside of the car. You're going to remove the cables the same way. The hardware is specific to its location. Make sure to keep all the bolts there and put them back on the tranny. Just reassembled. I generally like to put all the parts that I took off back on so that I can keep a good inventory of all that, and of course not lose any of the hardware. My shifter and shift cables are put back together as well. I always put it back so that I can keep all the stuff organized. Of course we have all the hardware. If you need to reuse those or want to reuse those, it's a good idea to keep inventory of those as well, along with our intermediate shaft. Another thing is we're going to do a dummy check. I bring a toolbox with me at the yard almost every time. It's a little bit easier to keep organized, and then a toolbox where all the sockets and stuff like that are just kind of rolling around in there, and it's hard to see whether you've left something behind or not. You know as much as I do, losing tools is a nightmare, especially your 10 millimeters, right? But of course if you're investing in high dollar tools as I do, I don't have to bring Snap-on tools or the Milwaukee stuff out to the yard like I do, but I like tools that work. And over the years, as long as me been doing this, the collection of tools I have work, and they work every time. One of the last things we're going to grab is the gauge cluster. The cluster is going to be removed just like an EK would. There are some screws up there, 2 screws that need to be removed up top, which we already did. And we'll just kind of fold the bezel back. The bezel's off, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4 screws holding that on. The cluster is now unscrewed, and it just simply pulls out. Now, when we're doing a cluster swap, we're gonna need all the clips too. So we're just gonna simply clip these off from the rest of the harness so that we have them when we do our CRV cluster conversion. Guys, thank you very much for tuning into the channel. Make sure to subscribe. Make sure to tune into our sister channel at VTech Academy. If you haven't already, make sure to support our channel by purchasing one of our D Series, B Series, H Series. We call them the Royal Huss t-shirts. The link will be down in the description below. Thank you very much. Happy tuning.
So how are you liking the temperature today?
So much better.
It is. Like, I'm kind of jealous of how cool it is here. I could do this regularly out here.
Yeah, like I haven't even broken a sweat yet.
That's pretty good. But you stay well hydrated, don't you?
Yes.
And why is that?
Well, because I use Gallon Gear.
You are the newest Gallon Gear ambassador, right?
Yes.
You just applied.
Yes.
Yeah, you got a little fitness career that you're starting out.
Yeah.
Like I can see the muscles in work right now. I got a little tricep action there. That's pretty cool.